Welcome back. I have an announcement for all of you who are in Europe. We are headed your way next week. So we're going to be touring all over Italy, Switzerland, France. So why am I telling you all this? Because we have a lot of listeners over in that part of the world, and we would love to have meetups. Now, how will you know where we'll be? We're going to be posting on Instagram every day, probably several times a day, as we meet up with podcast listeners. And also, there's a lot of people over in those countries that are also part of our EXP family. So I won't talk any more about that, but we would love to meet as many of you as possible while we're there. And what we'll do is we'll post where we're going to be. We did this a couple years ago when we traveled around the United States for the same reason. And we met up with a lot of podcast listeners and, coaching clients and people with EXP. And we just announced where we were going to be. And then we would obviously meet up with as many people that showed up. And sometimes it was a lot. Sometimes it was one. Doesn't matter. Okay. We enjoyed it and look forward to meeting as many of our European fans, podcast listeners and coaching clients and EXP family as possible. So today's topic is get the buyer rep signed in 3 easy steps. Now, we have got a ton of new content that's going to be released over the next 4 weeks.
Yes.
That's primarily about this buyer representation issue. And Julie and I think, have probably become, I'm getting close to be considering myself an expert on how to handle all the new changes that are happening to buyer representation. It's hard for me even to say it.
I know, it's okay.
But the reality of it is that there are going to be a lot of changes that are going to happen. And the essence of it is that all of you are going to be able to make the transition. You're just going to have to change your approach to working with buyers in only one aspect, and that's going to be you're going to have a formalized presentation where you're showing your value and whatnot. And I had an interview on Friday with Inman, and they were asking they're interviewing all the top coaches in the country, and the question was, how are you telling your coaching clients how to adapt to these new times? And I asked the reporter what everyone else was saying, and they all said the same thing, which is,
you must learn to articulate your value.
Right. And then I asked her, well, what were they saying, these other coaches, what were they saying, telling their clients supposedly how to articulate their value? And she said that most of them had no answer to how to articulate their value, which I thought was funny. And so, of course, we do. And it's part of the coaching program, Premier Coaching. And when you get to the buyer section in Premier Coaching, we're probably going to put that a little bit sooner, I think, in the program.
Sure.
But yeah, we give you the exact USPs, unique selling propositions, and how to show your value to the buyer. It's, things like the communications guarantee, things like the program where, you can offer all these or you can choose not to. It's up to you. But one of the other suggestions we have is you offer to sell the house for the buyer. Like, the buyer sell or buy with your home with me. And if you're not 100% satisfied, I'll sell it for you for free within 180 days or maybe for a year. It doesn't matter. Basically where you wouldn't charge them a listing commission, those types of things. We have probably 6 to 8 different unique selling propositions that you can choose to use or not. But we did answer the question, how are coaching clients making themselves unique in the marketplace? And you'll be able to use that same information. But really where most of it comes down to is skills. It's showing what you're going to do above everyone else as far as finding inventory of homes for sale, as far as different ways you can negotiate contracts. And then I did another couple interviews actually last week, and of course everyone's just focused on this particular thing. And the more and more I was talking about this particular topic, and obviously with Julie, she and I are really focused on it, the more I realized that I don't really think it's going to be that big of a difference, and for agents that are just willing to take an extra 15 minutes and drill down on how to communicate with realtors. And the product that Julie and I are going to be coming out with towards probably third quarter is going to be what I think it's going to be one of our coolest products ever.
For sure. That is our plan, after all.
Yes, that's our pre-listing pack, right.
Yeah.
And so what it is before you meet with a buyer, you're going to be sending them a package of information. It's going to be probably 12 to 16 pages, something like that. And it's going to articulate your value, and it's going to show the prospective buyer exactly what you do to earn your commission. And it's going to explain all the thorny issues ahead of time so that when you meet with a buyer, or frankly, you can do it digitally too, but when you meet with the buyer, it's going to be just essentially moving forward with the relationship, and they're going to sign the exclusive with you. And that's the way we roll. So that's going to be something available to you probably in third quarter after we're done with our tour in Europe. And then when we get back, we're going to work on that. But here's the really fun part. We're talking with 2 different companies. They're kind of, both vying for our business for this. But I wanted to make it so, Julie and I thought it'd be great if we could produce said product and make it so that you guys could, have an avatar, like an AI avatar that would deliver the pages for you. In other words, imagine you presenting this buyer package to, you're actually doing it to a prospective buyer. And then you're going to have to explain what your communications guarantee is. You're going to have to actually explain to them, all the different things. And yeah, that's going to take some time. It's going to take some skill. You're going to have to learn what all the pages mean. Well, we're going to make it so you're going to have an avatar do that. So the plan is, and this is how we're going to coach you guys to do it, is you're going to send a digital version of the pre-listing pack and a paper version of the pre-listing pack. I call it pre-listing pack because that's what we call it on the seller
pre-buyer
side.
Pack.
Pre-buyer pack, right? And then in the digital version, the AI is going to deliver the essentially explain the pages and why you want to work with Tim and Julie. And then we're also going to make it so the AI, this is the fun part, it can deliver it in different languages. So if those of you who are in an area, well, I don't know if there's any, like Spanish obviously would be a big thing in the United States.
Definitely.
Yeah, but you can have it delivered in Spanish. You can have it in any language. We're going to do it, probably launch it in 6 different languages. I know certain parts of LA, there's a lot of Russian folks, things like that. So that's what we're going to do. It's going to be a really, I think, a state-of-the-art product where it's going to make it so that even the newest, most nervous agent ever is going to be able to get buyer agency contracts signed, because Julie and I are going to do all the heavy lifting for you with this product. So if that doesn't make you excited, I don't know what will. But it all swings back to the fact that I really don't think it's going to be that big of a change in essence. And we did have, I can't stop talking about all these interviews I've been doing.
That's okay. You've been doing a great job with those.
Well, I did another interview with the, he's not the founder, but he's the CEO of SunWest Mortgage.
Yes, Pavan.
Pavan, yeah. Pavan Agarwal, one of our neighbors actually. And his dad started SunWest, I found out. He didn't. Anyway, so he was describing all the ways that you can now finance in. And Julie and I frankly had a misunderstanding of how the changes to FHA and VA, or FHA, Fannie, Freddie, and all the rest of it. So there's, you can actually, what is it called? Seller concessions. So you can finance seller concessions, but now on top of the seller concessions, and this is the part I think that, I was getting wrong. I don't know if you were getting it wrong, but I didn't realize on top of the seller concessions can go the buyer agent commission. Did you know that?
I hadn't sorted those two out, so I'm glad that you guys clarified that. Did he talk at all, and they need to listen to the interview, obviously.
Well, I haven't released it yet, but we will.
Did he talk about how or if the appraised value would be affected by that?
It doesn't matter, because basically the financing the appraisal is not going to be be the determining factor in the amount that the government agencies will finance, because they're going to essentially say, yeah, I know. That's incredible.
That's all good news.
Well, so did you know, like on some of these, I forget if it's, I think it's FHA, it's 6% over. Is that FHA deals?
I believe so.
So you can have seller concessions of 6%. But what he was saying, and he did check this too. Matter of fact, he checked it so thoroughly we had to re-record part of the interview. He said on top of that, you can put the buyer agent commission. And the buyer agent commission can be whatever you negotiate. I think it's up to 3%.
It's basically independent of the other concessions.
Right, that goes on top. So one of the things you're going to be doing when you're, or really the virtual version of you, when presenting the buyer agency, agreement is through our pre-buyer pack, is there's going to be a page in there that's going to explain how you're paid. And we're getting obviously to the very, essence of all the different what we think to be the most viable and reasonable ways that a buyer agent's going to get paid. And frankly, we think 99% of the time it's just going to be financed in the deal.
Well, you just made me think of something else that we may need to do as a supplement is I wonder how many listing agents are going to know what you and Pavan talked about, because so far we've had several instances and some coaching clients have reported back to us and listeners where, they're trying to do some of these more now seen as creative. I think it'll become a very common thing, but currently seen as creative. And because the listing agent simply isn't familiar with it, they don't choose their offer.
But the listing agent won't really care, because it's going to be the offer, and then the seller concessions are going to go. So let's say it's listed for $400.
Okay.
You're going to offer the seller, just saying, let's just say you offer the seller $400, the seller accepts it.
Yep.
And then in addition to that, the concessions are going to go on top.
So their net will be the same. Yeah.
So it doesn't cost the seller anything. So
I'm with you on all of that. I just want to make sure that, we're educating everybody properly on all of these things. So let's bring this back to how do you go about getting the buyer rep signed in 3 easy steps? What we're doing on the podcast is familiarizing yourselves with how the presentation will work, so that when you have our presentation, you'll understand all that from your perspective and from the buyer's perspective. So go ahead.
So anyway, if you're interested in joining Premier Coaching, if you've not done so yet, please do jump into Premier Coaching right away. We're going to be evolving that product, at really the quickest rate we've ever evolved it. We've been we change it practically every month and update things. We have the information in there about how to become a luxury agent, how to, farm, how to do branding, of course, how to be a proactive lead generator, all the scripts, the objection handlers, everything. It's a complete real estate system. So if you want to join Premier Coaching for free right now, just scroll down below and click the link to join Premier Coaching, or just go to premiercoaching.com, and you do get full access for the first level for the first 30 days. And that does include a daily semi-private coaching call with one of our Harris certified coaches. So we're extremely excited because of the changes happening in the marketplace, because it will allow many of you to, frankly, because of your skill set, you're going to have massive amounts of knowledge and confidence, which will give you an advantage in the marketplace, because, knowledge equals confidence and ignorance equals fear. So today, like Julie said, we're going to be talking about how to get the buyer agency or the buyer rep contract signed.
Exactly. All right. So I know that sometimes you guys are already frustrated with working with buyers, regardless of what we all just talked about with the getting it signed. Sometimes they can be unpredictable, non-committal, even unresponsive. And we know you're also freaking out about that buyer rep agreement being now or almost now required. There's only one solution to eliminating all that stress and guesswork. And actually, there are two solutions. So write this down. We'll talk about how to get the notes after I do these first 2 points here. Number one solution, always be the listing agent. But until you've built your active listing inventory up to the point that you can refer your buyer business, you'll need the second solution, which is what we just discussed, the buyer presentation. You'd never go into listing without a presentation. At least we hope that you don't. If you do, you also need coaching. So why do you give your precious time, skill, and dedication to buyers without one? And again, that's soon going to be not an option for you.
You know what this is going to do with all the buyer agents now having to give formalized presentations and take a more formalized approach? Mm-hmm. It's going to break down the barriers, the psychological barriers a lot of buyer agents have had about becoming listing agents.
Yes.
So it'll actually, agents will say, well, if I can do that, then why have I been holding off on becoming a listing agent? And then they're going to start realizing it's just the same, formalized approach applied to sellers, which is, a lot of agents have been attracted to working with buyers because it does require, frankly, a lot less of a formalized approach, a lot less, let's be honest, skills, a lot less. There's no real presentations necessary to get a buyer to work with
That's
you.
right.
Well, that's all changing. And I bet you it is going to open up the doors for a lot of people to psychologically get past that and become listing agents.
That's an excellent point. It's kind of like a bridge skill to upgrading the rest of your skills. That's a great point. Okay, sometimes you guys wander around in the real estate wild saying things like buyers are liars. Well, buyers aren't liars. They just have no idea what to expect because of what Tim just said. You didn't have to have a presentation. They don't know what the correct process is, what to expect from you, what you expect from them, or anything else that agents like to get upset about. The fact is that it's not the buyer's fault. It's the agent's fault for not educating them on what's supposed to happen throughout the process. This is also why agents don't typically get the buyer's agency form signed historically. Remember that the definition of close, in this case, closing on a signature on the agreement, the definition of closing is the logical ending to a great presentation. So if you try to close for a signature on the buyer rep agreement without a presentation, well, why would the buyer want to do that? Of course, you'll face rejection and never want to ask again. Does that sound about right? Some of you listening, as we know, you tell the coaches, I tried it, and then I decided against it.
And remember what Julia's saying, and some of you might be hearing this for the first time. It is no longer optional. A lot of you haven't gotten buyer agency contracts, exclusive buyer agency contracts signed in your marketplace because nobody else uses them. And actually, when you're asking a buyer to sign an exclusive contract with you, and all your competitors are, working with buyers without those exclusives, it does put you at somewhat of a competitive disadvantage because the buyer's going to say, well, I don't have to, obviously I can work with Bob versus Tim and Julie and not have to be obligated. Well, guess what? It's going to be a level playing field, and everyone's going to have this skill set.
That's an advantage to agents because you no longer are competing against the other agent that doesn't make them sign anything.
Well,
right?
It's going to be an advantage to the agents that actually know how to present well, and this is the essence of what we're saying. If you just show up with your MLS, whatever the heck the paperwork's actually going to look like, we haven't seen really any of it except from 2 MLSs. But when you show up and say, guess what, Mr. Buyer, before I show you this house, you have to sign this exclusive agreement. Oh, yeah, that clause there, that says basically if you buy this house, you're going to owe me 3%. They're not going to sign that.
That's not a presentation.
That's not a presentation. And so you guys are going to, frankly, a lot of agents who are not listening to our podcast, who are not taking our coaching advice, they're not going to survive. And that's unfortunately the truth. But again, those of you who are listening, those of you who are taking action, will have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, that advantage will probably last a year to 2 years before the rest of the market catches up and it becomes normalized. But really what you're going to see is you're going to see a bunch of new agents come into the industry who are not going to have any psychological issues knowing that they have to present to buyers, and they're the ones that are going to start replacing the ones that are still struggling getting it signed.
That's very well put, because they don't know the difference. They're just going to do what's supposed to be done.
Right.
Okay, so the solution, of course, is to use an actual buyer presentation. You'd never expect a seller to sign a listing agreement without a presentation. So we're going to talk about the buyer presentation, how to get the signature in 3 steps. But before we do that, quickly, can you tell them how to get the notes? Because we're about to get into some weeds
Sure.
here.
It's just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. That's where the notes for today's podcast and every podcast live. Happily waiting for you. harrisrealestatedaily.com is our daily newsletter. It is where we're releasing all these interviews first. It costs you nothing. It takes you a millisecond to sign up. The link is below, or of course you can just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com.
All right, so this first point has some little micro points. It's all about explaining the actual process to correctly purchase a home. In what order does your buyer or buyer couple or partnership, what have you, in what order will they need to execute those action steps? A lot of trouble happens because they don't know what those steps are. So in your presentation, the first thing you're going to do is go through the process. First-time buyers are especially in the dark about what to do and how to act, but other buyers from different markets or different countries can also be confused. It's not their job to know what to do. It's your job to set expectations and to educate them. You've also noticed that folks who haven't bought for several years may have different expectations than what today's market requires. So you're going to start with the buyer process. Actually educate your buyer prospects about what is supposed to happen and in what order. For example, we're going to go through just the bullet points. Remember, you get the rest in coaching. What is the process? They must become pre-approved and ideally get an actual loan commitment from a mortgage lender. You can supply your buyer with a standard list of documents required to apply for the mortgage, and the specific lender can add anything particular to them. Your buyer should also be aware of their own credit scores at this point in the process. Now, if your buyer is all cash, they need to secure a proof of funds letter from the entity where their cash is parked. That could be bank accounts, investment accounts, etc. Now, cautionary tale: is the cash coming from selling something that hasn't sold yet, an insurance settlement, a divorce settlement, or gift money? Do they have the money currently? Again, this is all about the process. Then, of course, they're going to meet with you for the actual buyer presentation, or in the future, you'll have your avatar doing that. We're going to drill down on that in a second. Part of the process is also discussing their expectations. What are their must-haves and what would there be nice to have items in their home? Help spouses or partners have a meeting of the minds. What can they reasonably get for their price range and geographic requirements? And then you'll create a strategy together if they're buying and selling at the same time, which should happen first. And again, we do have coaching about how to determine that and how for you to coach your clients to buy first, sell first, all of that sort of thing. You'll discuss what will be expected when they find the right home, especially in areas where it's still very competitive. Appraisal gaps, going over list price, flexibility with closing dates and possession. This would be another good place to talk about if we're going to do seller's concessions. And then eventually they will sign the buyer representation agreement with you, and then they start looking for their home. You'll write the contract, get it accepted, or lather, rinse, repeat if you get shot down. You'll go pending, schedule inspections. You'll get help from your transaction coordinator, remove contingencies, and close. That is the short version of the process of actually buying a house. Now, if you don't discuss the process with your buyers before you start showing them properties, as many of you have become accustomed to, just popping up and showing them anything, don't be surprised when you find out that they are, A, not really qualified, not really cash, looking in the wrong price range, etc. B, also working with another agent or multiple agents. You're just the showing agent. They plan to actually write it with their friend, relative, previous agent, or listing agent.
Because there's nothing preventing a buyer, unfortunately. You're not going to know for sure whether they signed something else with somebody else. You can ask them, and they'll say, well, I haven't signed an exclusive buyer agency contract with somebody else. But they may have, and what are you going to do? I mean, so you're going to have to really get down and know how to ask the right questions. I assume because you're calling me directly that you're not working with another agent.
That's part of our scripts.
Right, and you have to actually ask questions like that and drill down to the essence of what's going on in their heads. But really, I'll tell you what the ultimate filter is for all this is sending them to a lender. And we are seriously considering partnering with a company basically to give you guys direct access to becoming lenders, employees of a national bank, so that you can actually start doing a lot of, frankly, you can start doing
the origination part.
Mortgage origination yourself. We're looking at all the legality of it, but so far it looks like it's something that real estate agents can do. And we're looking for a partner, and I think we found one that's going to make it so that it's a very seamless process. Again, you won't have to get a mortgage license, which is, I think, the bugaboo for most of the people that are thinking about, agents that are thinking about doing loans. That'll be an advantage, assuming all the numbers make sense. That'll be an advantage to all of you, because when you're meeting with a buyer, again, you're going to be able to, with essentially sending them a link, you're also going to be able to help them get their loan, which will be one less person they have to hassle with. So yeah, more of that's going to be, more information on that's going to be coming soon, and very excited to make it so that you guys are excited as we are about the changes in the industry, because remember, the greatest fortunes in the history of humanity have always been made during the greatest times of change, and I think all of you will agree we're in one of those times now.
Yes, that is going to be super exciting. All right, so again, if you don't have the presentation and of course the agreement signed, don't be surprised if you find your buyer, supposed clients, are going out on the weekend to look at open houses and or new construction. Maybe they're even considering that for sale by owner in their favorite neighborhood. So again, buyers aren't liars. They just don't know what's expected of them until you properly educate them. It's not fair to magically expect them to act like the perfect buyers for you. And that brings us to our next point, which is number 2. The buyer presentation explains what to expect from you, what they can expect from you, and what you should expect from them. This way they'll know what's appropriate behavior while they're looking. For example, you expect them to be loyal to you because you're spending time and energy finding a home that meets their criteria.
The buyer agency contract will solve for that, obviously. They can expect you to be loyal to them, and what their essence, what they want to know is they want to know what the hell you're going to do to find them a house.
What are you going to do for me lately, basically?
Exactly. And that's what agents are really crappy at articulating, because most agents don't know really how to explain much beyond what they found in the MLS, which the buyers can find themselves. And one of the parts of the pre-listing, I keep saying pre-listing, but the pre-buyer, thank you, is going to be a list of all the things you're going to do to help them find a house other than looking in the MLS. And if you can't prove value beyond what every other, Tom, Dick, and Harry agent can do, why would they want to sign an exclusive contract with you?
Yes, well, and in fact, we have a special page in the pre-buyer pack. I have a hard time saying that too, because we say pre-listing package. It's programmed into our brains and our mouths. But in the pre-buyer pack, there's a specific page called 20 things I do other than using the MLS to find you your dream home.
Right. Maybe we need to give it a better name. Maybe that's
well, we're still working through that, obviously. Yes. Okay. But I think they know what we mean. You're going to also coach them to say that they're working with you. You're going to give them 10 of your business cards, whether they're looking at new construction, for sale by owners, open house sellers, or other listing agents. Think about that when they're talking to listing agents. The listing agent, of course, wants to know if they've already signed. You coach them not to apply for new lines of credit until they've closed. This includes boats, cars, and anything else that requires a credit check.
Julie, it's interesting. If you were to solicit a listed property, if you were to go up to a property listed with ABC Realty, and you were to knock on the door and you were to try to get that seller to, throw their existing listing agent under the bus and you try to take the listing, clearly that's a violation.
Clearly.
Right? So it'll be fascinating to see what similar guidelines are put in place to keep agents either knowingly or unknowingly poaching other agents, buyers who are under contract. And it'll be, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of, I think, trials and tribulations, and maybe in the legal sense, literal sense,
with enforcement
for all this to get sorted out. But again, get way ahead of the curve and don't allow your emotions to get stuck in the fray that's going to, frankly, confuse a lot of the industry. Be confident. Have your presentation ready. Julian was telling me about some of her coaching clients. She's got elite coaching clients, or some of the most successful agents in the country, and they're like, "What is everyone in a fuss about?" Because I've been doing what you guys have prescribed to us in Premier Coaching for decades in some cases, and as a result of that, we've always used a buyer presentation. We've always gotten buyer agency contracts signed in markets where other people weren't asking for buyer agency contracts. So hopefully you're feeding off of our energy and enthusiasm and excitement for the changes, because we know what's going to happen. This reminds me when Julie and I were the first in the nation to bring a short sale training program available back in September of 2007. And we rolled that out. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. And, there was hundreds of agents that signed up within the first 24 hours and wanting to learn how to do short sales. This opportunity for all of you is similar, because what those agents were realizing is they want to be first to market, showing sellers a way out of their underwater house other than foreclosure. And some of them made fortunes and became the top agents in their marketplaces. The same thing is going to happen now with this.
Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned our coaching clients, because they universally report the sense of relief and enthusiasm at the same time when they are successfully getting that signature. And they're reporting what you said. It's really no big deal when you use the presentation, because again, closing for a signature makes sense after a great presentation. And that is exactly how they're getting those signatures.
Well, a signature, someone making a commitment to you and you making a commitment to somebody else, is the natural output of a great presentation. It's like you and Zoe were making a birthday cake for my mom over the weekend. She just turned 84 on Friday, and you put this ingredient in, this ingredient in, this ingredient out, and at the output, when you pull it out of the oven, you have a chocolate cake.
It's logical.
It's logical. That's what a presentation is. It's not something to be intimidated about. It's something to be excited about. You like chocolate cake, don't you?
That was a perfect segue.
Was it?
That was one of your better ones. Okay. So back to the presentation. If they are buying and selling with you, make sure that you do a seller's net sheet and you've captured all of the payoffs required. HELOCs, that's home equity lines of credit, other liens, etc. Some sellers actually believe a HELOC isn't attached to the house, but it is. Have a title agent or your broker help you with net sheets if you're uncomfortable or unfamiliar doing the numbers. Review the next steps with your buyers. Is it time to finish their pre-approval, or are they ready to go out and buy something? Set your next appointment before this appointment, your presentation appointment, is over, so you don't have to chase the client down in voicemail, texts, and emails. So you can see, again, we're giving you the broad strokes here. This is not the presentation. We're exposing you to what's in the presentation. And of course, last but not least, number 3, communicate consistently and by voice. Why? Because buyers are nervous about everything all the time. And if they're not hearing from you, you're making it worse. They don't know if you've been looking for properties all day, especially outside of your MLS. If you're visiting new construction on their behalf or seeing that for sale by owner, seeing if that's a match for them, they don't know you're doing that if you're not telling them. And buyers will ghost you, work with somebody else, or give up if they don't feel you're doing your job for them. Bonus point number 4, and you knew this was coming, be the listing agent. You can always refer your buyers to a buyer partner and opt out of all of this, but only when you're a powerful listing agent. And even then, our coaching clients, especially our elite clients, have lots of listings. They still are working with 2 or 3 top buyers and will still need the presentation and use it.
That bonus point number 4 really is where the industry is going to pivot towards in a meaningful way. And again, I don't mean to beat our own drum, but if I don't do it, nobody else will. The fact is that that's what our recurring message has been for decades, is be the listing agent. You don't have to wait to become a listing agent. Julie and I, our first year in real estate, first full year in real estate in our 20s, we sold over 100 homes, 103 with our pendings, and half of those were sellers. Half of those were listings. We did not, frankly, we hardly ever went into the office and didn't have conversations with a lot of real estate agents. We got hold of a couple rudimentary scripts, but really at the end of the day, once we had one successful experience with one for sale by owner, we realized it's pretty damn easy. You're just saying the same thing over and over again. And then guess what? Most of those sellers they wanted to move up and buy a house. And so that was always 2 transactions. And it only took Julie and I having an experience once for the light bulb to go off in our head that we want to chase sellers. Because sellers are, guys, think about it. How would Zillow exist if it wasn't for listing agents, right? How the industry exists without listing agents?
It couldn't.
Listing agents have all the leverage. Now, she did say twice, and I thought this was worth grinding down on or drilling down on a little bit. So when you are a very successful listing agent, as some of you are, and you have a lot of buyer leads coming at you, don't blow those buyer leads off. Organize a system where someone's going to pre-qualify them, maybe yourself, depending how busy you are. And then you choose, a lot of those buyers are going to show up in your life, but they're actually sellers. In other words, they're calling about your listing, but they have a house to sell. If you are not calling those folks back and you're not doing a real thorough job of pre-qualifying them, you're never going to find the easiest listing leads, which are the ones I just described. So you're going to want to pre-qualify, if not have a high level, very skilled person doing it for you. And follow our scripts, follow our system. But you are going to stumble across occasionally buyers that have nothing to sell, maybe in price ranges or area of town you don't want to work in. We do want you to refer those out. And I'm not an advocate of charging this much, but let me tell you, we have it on good authority that some of the big portals, the ones that start with, say, Z, are going to start charging 50% and are already experimenting with charging 50% in some marketplaces. I want you to think about that. it's going to become normalized if, these big portals have their way to charge agents a 50% referral fee on buyers. Well, if you have a buyer lead and you charge, say, 40% or even 50%, I suppose. Personally, I would go with 25%. Julie and I will send referrals out sometimes from our own real estate leads, and that's all we ask for. Maybe we're being dumb. I don't know. Yeah. But in any event, so you could charge 50%. So you could actually, when you get really good at pre-qualifying, this is going to be an epiphany for some of you. You take 3 or 4 listings, and let's say you generate for each of those listings on a weekly basis, let's say you generate 10 buyer leads, and you just, let's be honest, been blowing those leads off. Well, you start doing an organized way of, following up, calling, organizing them, and you start referring, let's say 7 of those off or 5 of those off, and 2 of those become transactions, and you're charging, say, 50% or 40% referral fees. That is a substantial, source of income for some of you. Take this seriously.
That's right. And that is a very valuable lead too when it's been pre-qualified. So some of you are going to go, oh, I can charge 50%, and you're going to have like these random internet leads that you think you can charge 50% on. That's not what we're talking about.
Nope.
We're talking about having a real pre-qualification conversation where if I'm referring that to you and I'm charging you 40 or 50%, your expectation is that you're going to have a sheet, or an email that says buyer and seller names. This is the price range. This is the lender they're using. Are they buying and selling at the same time? Are they pre-approved? Are they all cash? What are they looking for? Are they exclusively working with us?
Well,
that has value.
Think about where this leads. So what we're realizing is because of the new change in the rules, there actually will be agents who are going to create sources of income for themselves based on the framework of we just gave you. Mm-hmm. So you're going to generate, so let's say, for example, you have 5 listings and you're generating all these buyer leads. I'll give you guys, if you want to generate buyer leads, just take a listing because you have to beat the buyers off the stick. And this is in most of the markets. So when you're generating all these buyer leads, again, you're now going to have a system in place to call them back, thoroughly pre-qualify them. And then you're going to be able to, you could scale that system. You could go to other markets. It's what Zillow does. It's what, essentially some of the brokers and these teams have been doing forever. You could replicate that on a small scale and it would cost you nothing. Now, I'll tell you what, because of these new buyer agency contract rules, what I would do if I were doing this idea is I would do everything I just said. And then what I would do before I referred that buyer lead to another agent, I would present our exclusive buyer agency, our pre-buyer pack. I would get an exclusive signed with Tim and Julie with that buyer, and then refer it out. That's the way I would go about doing it. So you secured that buyer, but then make it clear to that buyer that they're going to be working with one of your buyer partners or something like that. That way, you're in essence still the listing agent, or in the case of working with the buyer, the agreement's with you. That way, you maintain some level of control. I wouldn't be surprised at all, wink, wink, if that isn't what Zillow starts doing. After all, they are licensed in all 50 states as well.
After all, exactly. All right. So remember, the difference between training and coaching is this. You're seeing headlines everywhere that say, you must learn to articulate your value. Okay, so that's coaching, telling you what you need to do. You need to have more listings. You need to be a listing agent. That's telling you.
Well, that's
coaching
training.
That's what I'm saying. That's training.
Well, just be clear. What she just said, you said coaching. What she just
that's training, telling you what to do.
Facts and telling things on people is just training. That's not coaching. Coaching is
showing you how to do it, how to implement, holding you accountable to actually implementing and getting you results. It's much more drilled down than simply telling you that you've got to articulate value. No kidding, you have to articulate value.
Julian, so training is very easy. Coaching is very hard. You guys can hear when you're listening to Julian on this podcast that we are very seasoned coaches. We've each done over 100,000 paid coaching calls each, okay? That's at least. And it is impossible for us just to train without drilling down. We can't do it. We can't just give surface level information, though it would make our lives a lot easier.
Yes.
Especially in this podcast. So the reason you love this podcast is because there's something different. You're listening to the words, you're understanding the concepts, but also we're giving you the information to implement it. That's just the surface compared to what you get in Premier Coaching. It's going to be this buyer agency, these changes, they're going to be very scary for a lot of people. They're going to scare, unfortunately, a lot of people to go into hibernation. A lot of agents, a lot of brokers are never going to come out of hibernation. Don't be one of those agents. Be excited about the change. And I'll end today with, something I mentioned a few minutes ago, and this is true. The greatest fortunes of men and women in the history have always been made during the greatest times of change. In the real estate industry, we're in one of those times now. And when the tides go out, obviously the people who are swimming without swimsuits are all exposed for what they were. That's also happening. So because of all these changes, because of all this disruption, because of, just all the things, no matter where you are in your career, maybe you're at the top of the mountain, you want to go higher. Maybe you're at the bottom of the mountain and you just want to take your first step. This is the right place at the right time now. It's critical that you take the right actions. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.